Now welcome to another Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for Bo-Katan, or should I say new results, since this is a redo vote after Season 3 of The Mandalorian. We'll then see how those results compare against not only her previous results, but against all the other characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of the comments left on the poll. But before we do any and all that, you can already nominate and or vote for which character we do next. Just head down and respond to my pinned comment below to nominate the one you'd like to see, just list the character's name, or vote with a thumbs up if they're already listed. Whatever single comment gets the most votes in the next 24 hours or so will be the winner and the character we do next. Alright, and on to the results for Bo-Katan Kryze, where we'll see that this time around, 10% of voters gave her an A, 50% thought she was a B tier character, 30% then went with a C, which left 6% to give her a D, and a final 4% to give her an F. And so when we do all the math here, and once again consider A score of 5 and F a score of 1, that means Bo-Katan ends up with an average score of 3.56, which is down 24 hundredths of a point from last time, and sees her go from 45th place overall down to 56th. And I think the question we're left with is, what went wrong with Bo-Katan in Season 3 of The Mandalorian? And that is, as we now move on to the comments, something we'll explore and try to answer, but not before just once again taking a quick moment to say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these videos, or any of my videos. Also a big thank you to everyone who supports this channel, or the other one, on Patreon. We appreciate it all very much. And now let's once again kick things off with the top rated comment, which this time comes to us from Weston Moore, who said, "I definitely prefer her Clone Wars characterization to the live action one." And I think this pairs rather nicely with this comment from Radio Hando, who said, "I always get whiplash when we go from her being pretty villainous in Clone Wars to her being a good guy in Rebels. Filoni loves his characters too much." Alright, so these two comments kind of sum up a good chunk of the comments this week. There were a lot of people who, one way or another, were pointing out the inconsistencies of Bo-Katan from show to show, from Clone Wars to Rebels, to then The Mandalorian, and even just in Clone Wars itself, considering she's a little different in Season 7 than from previous seasons. And what it really boils down to, in my opinion at least, as always, you're not only free to, but encouraged to share your own takes in the comments below about these characters. But in order for the character of Bo-Katan to work on the whole, start to current endpoint, you have to believe or sort of trust in there being two moments that completely changed everything for her and sent her down a completely different path. The first is Maul killing Pre Vizsla and essentially taking the throne of Mandalore and shattering what she'd been fighting for, not to mention killing someone she cared obviously a great deal about. We don't ever truly get to know what the relationship is between those two, but I'd imagine they are pretty close, if you will. And the other is then, of course, the death of her sister, the death of Satine, which in a big way she does help facilitate because she openly and actively opposed her sister's pacifist ways and the government, and helped Maul be in a position to deliver the killing blow, if you will. Which is then also why it's a bit difficult to believe that her sister's death would have such a huge impact on her, considering the plan was always to overthrow Satine and she wasn't opposed to hurting whoever, even her own people, to make that happen. Not to mention, and I think this is the big one, we don't ever really hear one talk about the other one, not in any sort of depth anyway. We don't know what went wrong between the two sisters or why Bo went one way and Satine went the other. We don't know if they were ever really close or not, and that story could quite easily make the whole thing work, right? If Bo and Satine have this really complex and complicated history together, well then we could maybe understand why that was such a turning point in Bo's life. The death of Satine, I mean. But no matter what happened between those two, we don't have any real sort of history for Bo, and she almost certainly ran away from her family and royal heritage for one reason or another and joined up with Pre Vizsla. She joined with what amounts to a terrorist group. And if we knew why she did that, we might begin to understand her on a much deeper level. And who knows, believe that Satine's death was something that truly did impact her because there was, whether she realized it or not, there was a ton of unresolved issues or feelings to grapple with when it came to her. And so though I agree there is this kind of whiplash with the character, there absolutely is, I don't think it's something that's unexplainable. Rather, it's that the story has thus far failed to iron out all these rough edges in her story and put the different pieces, the different parts of her story together in a way that makes one complete and understandable picture. Alright, and now on to this comment from KSCZ9QC, who said, Instead of the Mad Hatter Tea Party, Mando Season 3 would have been much better served by including flashbacks of Bo as a member of Death Watch, and realizing her mistakes and then follow it up with her sacrificial surrender to Gideon only to be betrayed by the Empire. Would have added more to her backstory and helped the audience understand why many are hesitant to accept her as Mandalore, also explaining her desperation to get her hands on the Darksaber and redeem herself. Would have made her interaction with Din's clan and the simple acceptance of her even more significant. In my opinion, highlighting her sketchy past in Season 3 would have enriched her character and made this season much more interesting, if we're wondering whether she has truly changed and whether she should be trusted with the throne after everything that's happened. B- for now, but possibly a C+ for the writers squandering opportunities. And I sort of agree and disagree in a way, because yes, I do absolutely agree, as I was just kind of talking about, that if they took the time to flesh out her backstory, if we got maybe some flashbacks to different parts of her life and saw some of these key moments that we're kind of missing out on right now, she's of course going to be a better character all around, a deeper, more complex one. We could understand her and potentially see what led to these changes, and it could all feel more natural. That said, I don't know that Mandalorian Season 3 was the place to do it. I think a lot of people, maybe even the majority of people, watch this show primarily for Din and Grogu, for their adventures and their story together. And after that being the focal point of 2 seasons, I certainly don't think they're in any way wrong for wanting and expecting that to continue, especially when Grogu was brought back so quickly. That implied a lot of Din and Grogu in the upcoming season, right? And I mean, sure, you can argue it's called The Mandalorian, that it's a very vague and generic title, that technically it could fit any Mandalorian, or it could change along the way. And even one of the producers, Rick Famuyiwa, has made this sort of argument recently, that the title doesn't specifically apply to any Mandalorian and it can change season to season. But come on, you can't feature a character for 2 seasons, that being Din, and have him be in virtually 95% of the scenes to have nearly everything shown from his perspective for 2 whole seasons, and then just go backseat him for another character and not expect some disappointment, if not flat out anger and resentment from the fans who have been watching for that character. And so from the point of view of many, she simply kind of comes in and hijacks his show, and unfortunately, it gets worse at the same time. We might be singing a different tune right now if this season had been fantastic, right? Instead, I'd argue nearly everything about this season, from the writing to just the way it looked, some of the special effects, was a step down from the previous 2. And you can call that either correlation or causation in regards to Bo taking over and the quality going down. But I think the results of this poll, the fact that she fell in the rankings, it says a lot of people did not appreciate what was done with this season of The Mandalorian, and that there is, right or wrong, again, there's some resentment towards Bo-Katan for taking over and backseating Din Djarin. Okay, let's now get to this comment from Outer Worlds Reviews, who said, "Having not seen all of Clone Wars or any Rebels, my knowledge of Bo is entirely from Mando and lore videos like yours. As such, I gave her a C. Bo was a rogue element in Mando Season 2 who raised interesting questions about Din's faith. Added to that was all the potential conflict to come from Din owning the Darksaber. Mando Season 3 nuked all that by making the conflict between them flat and amicable. Bo is still interesting. The Mythosaur sighting clearly shook her beliefs to the core, which is always interesting to see in characters, but there would need to be a different hook for me to be interested in watching much more of her story." Okay, so I think it's rather interesting to get the perspective of someone who doesn't know or hasn't seen sort of the rest of or the beginning of Bo's story. And I do think you touched on maybe one of the biggest problems here, that there isn't really a great hook to get people to care about her, especially if you don't know all of that previous stuff. For many, she just kind of comes out of nowhere. She's this side character who's kind of an antagonist, kind of a friend in Season 2. And now in Season 3, the story just starts to center around her, and centers around her becoming the new leader, or leader again, of Mandalore, when many thought perhaps, or especially after getting the Darksaber, that this was sort of going to be Din's destiny to lead one day. And even for those of us who do know her, who have seen Rebels and Clone Wars maybe multiple times, we're not sure why we should care so much about her right now. Why should we feel bad for her when much of this was kind of brought on herself? She was a part of Death Watch, and again, we don't know why, we just know she was. She chose the quote-unquote bad guys, and she did plenty of horrible things while a part of them. She then had the Darksaber handed to her and failed Mandalore, and now we're supposed to sort of back her and get excited about her trying all of this again. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't like Bo-Katan at all, or that I think her story is terrible. As I keep saying, it's missing pieces that could elevate it to the next level. It's missing the reasons to truly get behind her and care about her now. And until they give us that, or figure out when and how to give us that, because again, I don't think season 4 of The Mandalorian is the place to do it, and I don't think the character could really support her own show. And so they've kind of backed themselves into a corner with the character. They've placed her in this position of prominence going forward, yet they haven't really given us the reason or cause to care, and I don't know when and how they can do that. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what they do with her going forward, what they do with her in, say, season 4 of The Mandalorian. And I think she's always going to be, unless they pull off some sort of miracle in that next season, I think she's always going to be this kind of B or C tier character. Alright, and now time for just a few final comments before wrapping this up. And I'll again start with one that's a little too long to read, but worth the pause and to read for yourself. And it comes to us from Ash Blossom and Joyous Sprung. And again, feel free to pause and read it. If not, let's move on to the next comment, which comes to us from Lord Emperor Vader, who said, Bo-Katan is the most interesting Mandalorian in canon, and in my opinion is superior to Din Djarin both as a character and as a leader. She is the most morally complex one, but since it has not really been looked at since Clone Wars, I have to give her a B. If they looked at it again, I would push her up to an A. I didn't mind her having a bigger role in Mandalorian Season 3, and she is clearly a better leader than Din. What I think many missed is the point of Chapter 22, Guns for Hire, is to show that Din was not a leader since he spends the episode acting on his prejudices and wants to do things his way, while Bo is willing to look at things from different angles and willing to take advice from Din, even though she disagrees with his methods because it seems to be working but takes control when she needs to. Those are actions of a good leader, and Bo learned from her many mistakes and wants to rule, and should be the ruler of Mandalore. Next up then we have this comment from Sachem, who said, I personally have always loved her. Sure, Mando Season 3 could have been more coherent, but I don't think that was her character's fault. I think that this poll will end up voting her lower than she really should be because of how a lot of people felt about this season. She's much more interesting and nuanced than most characters. There's also something super charming about Katie Sackhoff. In any case, I'd love to rule Mandalore with Bo. A for my queen. We then move on to this one from Classic Max Reviews, who said, Bo-Katan is the definition of an average main character. She isn't actively annoying or bad, but she isn't really an inspiring or lovable character either. She just sort of does things as and how the story dictates. That being said, she seemed to be a much more interesting character in the Clone Wars than in The Mandalorian. We then move on to this one from Eric Beyer, who said, really liked her character in both Clone Wars and Rebels. She went from a selfish villain to a lesser of two evils versus Maul, to a twice failed leader. You could see and believe her change from a hubris nature to a more reluctant, jaded leader. Mando Season 3 started well enough, but didn't nearly deal well with how the other tribes could believe in her again and fighting her own personal demons to earn her place as the Mandalore. B in animation, D in live action, C overall. And finally, we have this comment from Beastly Arrow, who said, I really like Katie Sackhoff and I love her passion for the character, but I feel pretty neutral about Bo. Maybe I need to rewatch Clone Wars, but it feels like I'm watching different characters even though it's the same one. Not her fault, more so the writing, I feel. It's a C grade for me. Also, more polls please, I love these. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about Bo-Katan, or what you think about what I or anyone else had to say about her here in this video. Or you can feel free to nominate and or vote for which character we do next by responding to that pinned comment below, or voting by giving a character a thumbs up. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.